subscribe, click on the bell, like, comment, share.
Section number 18 of Seeking a Human Spaceflight Program Worthy of a Great Nation. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Linda Marie Nielsen, Vancouver, BC. Seeking a Human Spaceflight Program Worthy of a Great Nation by the Review of U.S. Human Spaceflight Plans Committee. Chapter 8 Partnerships. Various forms of partnerships have been discussed throughout the report. This section examines in greater detail international partnerships, Section 8.1, as well as partnerships among elements of the U.S. government, Section 8.2. 8.1 International Partnerships. The human exploration of space is historically intertwined with the recent evolution of America's international relationships. The U.S. has moved from an era of competing with the Soviet Union in the Apollo era to collaborating with our historical allies in space station freedom, to embracing the Russians in the International Space Station, and now to engaging many potential new partners. Space exploration has become a global enterprise. Many nations have aspirations in space, and the combined annual budgets of the space programs of our principal partners are comparable to NASA's. See Figure 8.1-1. If the United States is willing to lead a global program of exploration, sharing both the burden and benefit of space exploration in a meaningful way, significant accomplishments could follow. Actively engaging international partners in a manner adopted to today's multipolar world could strengthen geopolitical relationships, leverage global financial and technical resources, and enhance the exploration enterprise. One means of reducing the funding demands of major human spaceflight programs is to join in partnerships with other nations that share common space goals. Thus far, 3 nations have by themselves placed astronauts in space: the US, Russia, and China. International programs offer the added advantage of providing access to advanced technology not available in the US, an increasingly common circumstance. Example, Russian-designed hydrocarbon RP-1 fueled liquid rocket motors. Such arrangements also facilitate cost sharing. The principal disadvantage of international programs, excluding business-to-business arrangements based on enforceable contracts, is the nations are sovereign entities and, as such, can unilaterally change their plans, which can be very disruptive. Much of the international community, probably justifiably, faults the U.S. with regard to this practice, but perhaps an even greater impediment to U.S. involvement in international cooperative programs is the U.S. International Trafficking in Arms Regulations, ITAR. The committee deems these laws to be outdated and overly restrictive for the realities of the current technological and international political environment. International programs are generally more difficult to manage than national programs, in part because of the need for a greater degree of consensus and coordination. However, this can often be overcome when one of the participating nations serves in a leadership role, as distinct from a domineering role. The management structure that has evolved for the ISS has proven particularly effective and can serve as the basis for the next major international cooperative human venture into space. The committee suggests that the president invite America's international partners to join with America in discussions of this possibility. The question occasionally arises whether the public would support space accomplishments shared among nations, as opposed to those representing purely American achievements. But the fact is that human spaceflight has always existed in an international context, first as competition and more recently as cooperation. It is difficult to argue against the latter. Moreover, the U.S. space program at its height had the self confidence to emphasize that the United States was acting as a representative of all humanity. The Apollo 11 plaque left on the moon reads, "Here men from the planet Earth first set foot upon the moon, July 1969 AD. We came in peace for all mankind." If international programs are to succeed, i.e., where a true partnership that benefits all parties exists, there will be inevitably some measure of dependency of the member nations upon one another. In some cases, this may imply dependency with regard to capabilities that lie on a mission critical path. Witness the impending launch gap. Nonetheless, if effective and meaningful partnerships are to be established, some degree of such dependency is simply the price of admission, a price the committee concludes that is worth paying in most instances. International cooperation has been fruitful for both robotic and human space missions. The U.S. has enjoyed long, positive space exploration partnerships with several countries. The U.S. has participated in cooperative efforts with Europe for many years, both through independent European country agencies and through the European Space Agency. Similarly, the U.S. has excellent historical space relationships with Japan and Canada. The U.S. Russian space partnership has roots in the Apollo Soyuz project of the early to mid 1970s. The current partnership began in the early 1990s with Phase 1 Shuttle Mir and continues today with Phase 2 ISS programs. The advantages have been noteworthy. Mir was revitalized and extended because of the capabilities of the Space Shuttle, and Russian assets provided U.S. logistics and astronaut transport to the ISS following the Space Shuttle Columbia's accident. In addition to synergies in space exploration, international civil space cooperation has provided positive grounds for fostering understanding between peoples and governments of partner countries. This committee believes that the existing partnership should be continued and urges the U.S. to consider expanding partnership by forming cooperative relationships with other countries, doing so within the current ISS partnership framework. This framework would serve as the foundation for international collaborations involving exploration beyond low Earth orbit. This position is consistent with the recent National Research Council report, America Future in Space, aligning the civil space program with national needs, which calls for enhancement of overall U.S. global leadership through global leadership in civil space activities. Specific recommendations address aligning international cooperation with U.S. national interests, which include expanding international cooperation and partnerships for the study of global climate change, the development of a body of law for a robust space operating regime, rationalization of export controls, expansion of the ISS partnership, continuation of international cooperation for scientific research and human space exploration, engagement of nations in educating their citizens for sustainable space technology development, and support for interchange among international scholars and students. Partner countries could develop planetary landers, Earth departure stages, habitats, and other significant systems and subsystems. As the lead partner, the U.S. could develop the Heavy Lift Launch Vehicle. This scenario would help divide costs equitably and elevate the prominence of partner countries. The committee notes that China has had an operational human spaceflight program since 2003, and India announced plans to launch astronauts into space using indigenous assets. The US and India have already begun cooperative activities in space. The Chandrayaan-1 spacecraft was flown to the moon in October 2008 with U.S. instruments on board. A number of nations are already developing capabilities that could significantly contribute to an international space exploration program. The U.S. has announced that it held preliminary discussions with China regarding joint space activities. It is the view of the committee that China offers significant potential in a space partnership. China has a human rated spacecraft and booster system and is only the third country to launch astronauts into space. It has demonstrated advanced capabilities, including extravehicular activity on a September 2008 mission. China plans to fly the Heavy Lift Long March 5 vehicle before 2015, which it indicates will eventually be used to establish a space station, currently planned for initial launch in 2020. 8.1.1 International Space Capabilities. The following summarizes the extent of demonstrated activities in space by nations other than the U.S. Canada. The Canadian Space Agency, CSA, is a partner in the ISS with significant experience in human operations in space. CSA has specialized in robotics and teleoperated systems, but also has extensive experience in remote sensing, radar, on-orbit servicing, communications, and space science. China. As the third nation in the world to launch humans into space, the People's Republic of China, PRC, has developed an indigenous capability for the technical requirements associated with human spaceflight. The PRC has a stable of space launch vehicles up to medium lift capability, 9 MT to low Earth orbit, with upgrade to 25 MT envisioned, including the upper stage capabilities for geotransfer orbit and interplanetary trajectories. China has launched one robotic probe to the moon and has follow-on missions planned. The PRC has robust capabilities in communications, navigation, and Earth observation satellites. Next on its announced human spaceflight agenda are demonstrations of rendezvous and docking and the construction of an orbiting space laboratory. The PRC has demonstrated capabilities in life support, power generation and storage, pressurized module construction, in-space propulsion and attitude control, guidance and navigation, and communications and computation. India. The Indian Space Research Organization, ISRO, possesses two very capable launch vehicles, and an upgrade is underway to provide a medium lift capability. India also has an indigenous capability to provide complex satellites and robotic scientific probes, as demonstrated by their first interplanetary robotic mission to the moon in 2008. A human spaceflight program is being strongly recommended to the Indian government by ISRO and is likely to be approved, which could lead to Indian human spaceflight capability as early as 2015. To date, the Indian space program has concentrated on telecommunications, Earth observation, and other low Earth orbit satellite programs. Japan. The Japan Aerospace Exploration Agency, JAXA, conducts a robust space program and is a partner in the ISS. Its workhorse launch vehicle, the H2, has been upgraded to the H2 transfer vehicle for use as a logistics carrier to the ISS. While the Japanese space program has a lower launch tempo than other major spacefaring nations, it has extensive capabilities, as demonstrated by the ISS Kibo laboratory, which includes teleoperated robotics. Japan has extensive experience in Earth and space science missions and telecommunications satellites, as well as in-ground base facilities for astronaut training, mission operations, communications, and tracking. Japan launched the very successful Cayuga lunar robotic mission in 2007 and has plans for follow-on lunar missions. South Korea. The Republic of Korea has its first space launch vehicle, developed with Russian assistance, ready for flight. Korea has flown as a spaceflight participant to the ISS via Russian launch and return, but has no other human spaceflight experience. The Republic of Korea has announced plans to develop a lunar orbit by 2020. Russia. Russia has a complete suite of space capabilities, from a robust launch vehicle stable to a broad spectrum of spacecraft design, production, and operation capabilities. Russia fields a number of space launch vehicles of proven design, from small through medium, 25 metric tons, to low Earth orbit, with various upper stage combinations that can provide payloads not only to low Earth orbit, but also to geotransfer orbit and to interplanetary trajectories. Russia is one of three nations to demonstrate the capability to launch humans into space. The highly evolved Soyuz spacecraft is currently programmed to become the linchpin of the ISS in the immediate future. Russia has also demonstrated capabilities in large space structures, pressurized modules, life support, power generation and storage, communications, thermal control, propulsion and attitude control, guidance and navigation, remote sensing, computation equipment, subsystems, and operation techniques. These are all elements necessary for both human and robotic space exploration. Currently, the Iran, North Korea, and Syrian Non Proliferation Act, INKSNA, has limited cooperation in space operations between Russia and the United States. European Space Agency. The European Space Agency, ESA, and its member states possess very significant space capabilities. ESA is a partner in human spaceflight for the ISS and has demonstrated its ability to build large, pressurized, habitable modules for use as part of the ISS, as well as launch, rendezvous, and other critical capabilities. Through Arianespace, a French company owned by the French government, the Europeans possess the most active commercial space launch program in the world, with various launch vehicles up to medium capability, 21 MT, to low Earth orbit. They have demonstrated the capacity to put significant payloads on interplanetary trajectories and have demonstrated space navigation and communications for both low Earth orbit and interplanetary robotic probes. ESA possesses industrial and commercial capabilities to build complex spacecraft and robotic probes, including all subsystems. The automated transfer vehicle has provided significant logistics support to the ISS and has the potential to be upgraded to a cargo return vehicle and eventually a human carrying spacecraft. Individual member states also have interest in and the capacity for cooperation outside the ESA structure. Cooperation with both ESA and individual European states allows access to significant technological capabilities. Nations other than the above have very limited space programs, but could potentially play niche roles as their national industrial and technical capabilities allow. 8.2 U.S. Intra-Government Partnerships. The committee has examined issues about the space program managed by U.S. government agencies besides NASA, such as the Department of Defense, DoD, and the Commercial Space Office of the Federal Aviation Administration, FAA. Their focus includes the potential impacts of human rating, the current Evolved Expendable Launch Vehicles, EELV, as one option to reduce the post-shuttle launch gap. The FAA concentrates on the role commercial space companies can play in the space exploration program. A study sponsored by the Congress in July 2008 titled Leadership, Management, and Organization for National Security Space described the total U.S. space enterprise as including civil space, commercial space, and national security space, military and intelligence focused. All of these elements have overlapping capabilities, share technologies, and depend on a common industrial base. As a result, any examination of the U.S. human space program must consider its impact on the efforts of agencies responsible for these other U.S. space activities and vice versa. The most obvious concern has been expressed by the DoD, particularly the U.S. Air Force, because of its unique role today as the single agent for government expendable launch capabilities. The family of Evolved Expendable Launch Vehicles, EELV, Atlas the Fifth and Delta the Fourth, represent the primary heavy lift capability for the DoD and intelligence communities. Any changes in configuration to these EELV systems, such as incorporating crew escape systems in orbit, in order to human rate them, raised concerns about the potential impacts on cost and the ability to reassign vehicles from the EELV production line to high priority national security missions. The committee reviewed the technical changes required to human rate an EELV. It also met with the National Security Space leadership in the Office of the Secretary of Defense, the Air Force, and the National Reconnaissance Office. Their views on this matter were consistent. None of the national security organizations would formally object to human rating an EELV if that option were indeed chosen by NASA for its space exploration requirements. However, the concerns noted above were expressed and would need to be managed. The EELV program was initiated in 1995 in response to the Space Launch Modernization Plan and a subsequent National Space Transportation Policy PDD/NSTC-4. In 1998, development agreements were awarded to Lockheed Martin and Boeing to incorporate government requirements, both civil and national security, into their commercially developed variants of the Atlas and Delta launch systems. Since 2002, the Atlas V and Delta IV EELV vehicles have successfully demonstrated the ability to meet all of the key performance requirements of mass to orbit, reliability, and standardization of launch pads and payload interfaces. Because the low Earth orbit commercial satellite market envisioned in the early 2000 time period never materialized, the U.S. government is still the primary customer for the EELV systems, which are now operated by United Launch Alliance, a joint venture of Lockheed Martin and Boeing. In 2005, an acquisition strategy change was made to maintain launch and launch service capabilities for the Atlas and Delta under a firm fixed-price EELV launch services contract. This contract provides for a critical mass of sustaining engineering and launch production personnel, even when the launch tempo is slow. The DoD, Air Force, indicates that it is technically feasible to human rate the EELV systems, as verified for the committee by an independent aerospace corporation study. In doing so, there are several areas that must be addressed. These include production facilities. United Launch Alliance is currently consolidating its manufacturing capabilities in Decatur, Alabama. The possibility of human rating the EELV systems may add complexity to the planning for this consolidation, though the committee notes that United Launch Alliance has the experience and motivation to mitigate any launch processing. The aerospace study commissioned by NASA on human rating the Delta IV Heavy informed the independent assessment of launch system alternatives conducted for the committee. This study on human rating the Delta IV Heavy presented several options to minimize conflict between civil and national security space launch demands. The aerospace options include the possibility of utilizing the Orbiter Processing Facility and Space Launch Complex 39 at the Kennedy Space Center for processing a first-stage human-rated EELV. Such options need to be further evaluated. Cost. The increased production rates stemming from both a human-rated EELV and the National Security Systems variant of EELV should have a positive effect on United Launch Alliance hardware costs and reliability, as well as on the United Launch Alliance vendor industrial base. A more efficient procurement, surveillance, and mission assurance program should benefit both DoD and NASA programs. Further, the implementation of a human rated EELV could accelerate the planned transition to a common upper stage for the Delta IV and Atlas V EELVs. Notwithstanding the cost opportunities, the implementation of a human related EELV does introduce changes in the existing EELV baseline program. Therefore, a comprehensive management plan and structure with clearly defined responsibilities, authorities, and accountabilities must be formulated if this option is pursued. A similar approach would be required for launch scheduling. Industrial base. If a decision is made to human rate the EELV systems and NASA were to abandon the Ares 1 system but retain the Ares 5 heavy launch capability, the solid rocket motor industrial base would need to be sustained until the Ares 5 generated demand. The DoD may have to consider support to the solid rocket motor industrial base in recognition of both civil and NSS needs. If both the Ares 1 and Ares 5 programs were abandoned, a detailed civil and military analysis would need to be accomplished to ascertain the interdependence of technical and production capabilities between large solid rocket motors that are needed to support the nation's strategic strike arsenals and the large segmented solid rocket motors supporting human-rated systems for NASA. Findings on partnerships. International partnerships. The U.S. can lead a bold new international effort in the human exploration of space if international partners are actively engaged, including on the critical path to success. There could be substantial benefit to foreign relations, and more overall resources could become available. National security space. A desirable level of synergy between civil space efforts and national security space efforts should be reached, taking into account the efficient sharing of resources to develop high-value components, as well as the potential challenges in joint management of programs and reliance on a single family of launch vehicles in a class, for example, heavy lift. End of section 18. Recording by Linda Marie Nielsen, Vancouver, BC.
Section 19 of Seeking a Human Spaceflight Program Worthy of a Great Nation. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Seeking a Human Spaceflight Program Worthy of a Great Nation by the Review of U.S. Human Spaceflight Plans Committee. Chapter 9. Concluding Observations. No carefully considered human spaceflight plan, even when promulgated with the best intentions, is likely to produce a successful outcome unless certain principles are embraced in its formulation and execution. Some of the more important of these principles, generally derived from hard-earned experience, are summarized in this final chapter of the report. While not explicitly tasked to offer such observations, the committee believes that it would be negligent in its duty were it not to do so. 9.1. Establishing goals. Planning a human spaceflight program should start with agreement about the goals to be accomplished by that program. That is, agreement about its raison d'etre, not about which object in space to visit. Too often in the past, planning the human spaceflight program has begun with where rather than why. This is undoubtedly, at least in part, attributable to the fact that many of the benefits of human spaceflight are intangible, e.g., the positive impact the Apollo landing had during a time of great tribulation for America. But this makes such intangible benefits and activities no less significant. Witness the importance assigned to great literature, music, and art in our nation's history. 9.2. Matching resources and goals. Perhaps the greatest contributor to risk in the space program, both human and financial, is seeking to accomplish extraordinarily difficult tasks with resources inconsistent with the demands of those tasks. This has undoubtedly been the greatest management challenge faced by NASA in recent decades, even given the magnitude of technological challenges it has confronted. Consider the Constellation program as a case in point. While it is not clear to the committee what exactly was the official status of the funding profile NASA assumed in planning the program, there are differing views on the subject. It is clear that the amounts are smaller today by about one-third. It is also clear that when initiating decades-long projects of a demanding technical nature, some baseline funding profile needs to be agreed upon and sustained to the greatest extent practicable. In the Constellation program, the estimated cost of the Ares 1 launch vehicle development increased as NASA determined that the original plan to use the Space Shuttle main engines on the Ares 1 upper stage would be too costly, in part due to the need to add self-start, but the replacement engine had less thrust and inferior fuel economy, so the first stage solid rockets had to be modified to provide more total impulse. This in turn contributed to a vibration phenomena, the correction of which has yet to be fully demonstrated. This is the nature of complex development programs with budgets that are far more likely to decrease than increase. Complicating matters further insofar as the Constellation program is concerned, this committee has concluded that the shuttle program will almost inevitably extend its fiscal year 2011 in order to fly the existing manifest, the extension largely attributable to safety considerations, and that there are strong arguments for the extension of the International Space Station for another 5 years beyond the existing plan. These actions, if implemented, place demands of another $1.1 billion and $13.7 billion, respectively, on the NASA budget. In addition, adequate funds must eventually be provided to safely deorbit the ISS, funds that were not allocated in the current or original program plans. Shrinking budgets and inadequate reserves, the latter not only in dollars but also in time and technology, are a formula for almost certain failure in human spaceflight. If resources are not available to match established goals, new goals need to be adopted. Simply extending existing, ambitious programs to fit the money is seldom a solution to the resource dilemma. The impact of fixed costs and technological obsolescence soon overwhelms any such strategy. In the committee's travels, it encountered widespread support for this policy of realism, although it is likely that most proponents were thinking of having more money, not less program. Should the latter turn out to be the case, much of that conviction is likely to vanish. In the case of NASA, one result of this dilemma is that in order to pursue major new programs, existing programs have had to be terminated, sometimes prematurely. Thus, the demise of the Space Shuttle and the birth of the GAP. Unless recognized and dealt with, this pattern will continue. When the ISS is eventually retired, will NASA have the capability to pursue exploration beyond low Earth orbit, or will there be still another gap? When a human-rated heavy lift vehicle is ready, will lunar systems be available? This is the fundamental conundrum of the NASA budget. Continuation of the prevailing program execution practices, i.e., high fixed cost and high overhead, together with flat budgets, virtually guarantees the creation of additional new gaps in the years ahead. Programs need to be planned, budgeted, and executed so that development and operations can proceed in a phased, somewhat overlapping manner. An additional action that would help alleviate the gap phenomena is to re-energize NASA's space technology program, an important effort that has significantly atrophied over the years. The role of such a program is to develop advanced components, for example, new liquid rocket engines, that can later be incorporated into major systems. Developing components concurrently with or as a part of major system undertakings is a very costly practice. A technology development program closely coordinated with major ongoing programs, but conducted independently of them, is preferable. 9.3. NASA Management Challenges. In planning to reach these lofty objectives with constrained resources, the question arises how NASA might organize to explore. The NASA administrator, who has been assigned responsibility for the management of NASA, needs to be given the authority to manage NASA. This includes the ability to restructure resources, including workforce and facilities, to meet mission needs. Likewise, managers of programs need clear lines of responsibility and authority. Management of unprecedented and complex international technological developments is particularly challenging, and even the best managed human spaceflight programs will encounter developmental problems. Such activities must be adequately funded, including reserves to account for the unforeseen and unforeseeable. Good management is especially difficult when funds cannot be moved from one human spaceflight budget line to another, and where new funds can ordinarily be obtained only after a 2-year budgetary delay, if at all. In short, NASA should be given the flexibility allowed under the law to acquire and manage its programs. Fixed overhead and carrying costs of NASA are currently helping to undermine what might be accomplished in new space endeavors. A significant fraction of what appear to be program-related costs in fact cover fixed and carrying costs of employees, facilities, and in some cases, contractors. This reality affects NASA in several ways. When a program such as the Shuttle is terminated, not all of the program funds actually become available to new programs. In fact, the fixed costs often simply move to the new program, where they continue to accumulate. When discretionary resources comprise a limited portion of overall resources, even modest program disruptions can have greatly magnified impacts. Significant space achievements require continuity of support over many years. One way to assure that no successes are achieved is to continually introduce change. Changes to ongoing programs should be made only for compelling reasons. NASA and its human spaceflight program are in need of stability, having been redirected several times in the last decade. On the other hand, decisions about the future should be made by assessing marginal costs and marginal benefits. Sunk costs can never be used as a reason not to change. The nation should adopt a long-term strategy for human spaceflight, and changes should be made only for truly compelling reasons. This report describes the advantages and disadvantages of each program option offered. The determination of whether in balance these exceed the compelling reason threshold is, of course, the essence of making a decision with regard to the future of the human spaceflight program. There is an often overlooked but vitally important part of the human spaceflight program that takes place here on Earth. This includes the contributions of the myriad engineers, technicians, scientists, and other personnel who work in NASA and industry. As Buzz Aldrin famously said, it's amazing what one person can do along with 10,000 friends. Special attention needs to be devoted to assuring the vitality of those portions of the workforce that represent critical and perishable skills that are unique to the space program. One example is the design and manufacturing of very large solid propellant motors. At the same time, it is demeaning to NASA's professionalism to treat the human spaceflight effort as a jobs program. Only a modest fraction of jobs generally fits the critical, perishable, and unique criterion. The NASA administrator needs to be given the authority to tailor the size of the NASA workforce and the number of centers employing that workforce to match foreseeable needs, much as is routinely done in the private sector under the pressure of competition. For example, when the end of the Cold War changed the role of the aerospace industry, some 640,000 jobs were terminated. Work should be allocated among centers to reflect their legitimate ability to contribute to the tasks to be performed, not simply to maintain a fixed workforce. NASA's relationship with the private sector requires particularly thoughtful attention. The two entities should not be in competition. NASA is generally at its best when innovating, creating, and managing challenging new projects, not when its talents are devoted to more routine functions. Industry is generally at its best when it is developing, constructing, and operating systems. 9.4. Systems engineering. If NASA is to successfully execute the complex undertakings to which it aspires, it must maintain a world-class systems engineering capability, a capability that this and other reviews have deemed to be marginal in its current embodiment. The dilemma is that the best systems engineers are often those with a great deal of experience, scar tissue, as it is often called by those in the aerospace industry. But how can one get scar tissue if one is confined to studying, analyzing, and overseeing the work of others? The answer, by and large, is that one cannot. One of NASA's answers to this dilemma, which has generated criticism in the past, has been to assume responsibility for developing selected major items of hardware internally, e.g., the Ares 1 upper stage. This, of course, places the institution in the hazardous position of serving at once as judge, jury, and potential defendant, as well as being in competition with those it manages in other arenas. Thus, NASA finds itself in the position of designing hardware, the engineering drawings for which are being produced by subcontractors to NASA to be handed over to a prime contractor to produce. This sort of formulation warrants exceptionally careful monitoring. It is fraught with opportunities for managerial conflict and technical incompatibility. A preferred approach for NASA to acquire a strengthened systems engineering capability would be to encourage or at least permit the movement of particularly talented individuals back and forth between government and industry, as often occurred during the Apollo program. This, however, is now discouraged or even precluded by today's government personnel policies, e.g., the long-time need for hiring well-intentioned but prohibitive conflict of interest policies, etc. Given this circumstance, the committee sees no ideal solution for maintaining a strong systems engineering capability at NASA. Perhaps the best among a generally limited array of choices is for NASA occasionally to take direct responsibility for relatively modest pieces of hardware, a responsibility that would not include making or subcontracting engineering or shop drawings for major items to be produced by others. It is noteworthy that the technology development program, cited elsewhere in this report, could be an effective training ground for systems engineers as well as program managers, all while maintaining risk at a manageable level. 9.5. Procuring systems. The committee has examined various future NASA system options and has observed that in many instances one of the more significant discriminators in development and operations costs is neither what NASA procures nor who supplies it, but rather how NASA procures and operates a system. The way NASA specifies, acquires, and uses systems, the tools NASA uses to manage its workforce, and the agency's authority to make purchase commitments all have a very large impact on what NASA can achieve for a given budget. Currently, NASA labors under many restrictions and practices that impair its ability to make effective use of the nation's industrial base. For example, NASA is commonly not allowed to change the size and composition of its workforce or facilities, which limits its ability to save money through the purchase of commercially available products. NASA has limited ability to shift funds between related projects to adapt to technical challenges without a protracted approval process. NASA is not permitted to make loan guarantees or employ other mechanisms by which it could create a market for commercial providers that might otherwise invest private funds in meeting some of NASA's needs. The Department of Defense has procurement rules that allow this. For example, NASA could very likely acquire propellant depots by making a bankable commitment to purchase propellant from such a depot, but depending on a promise from NASA today would almost certainly not be viewed as a reasonable risk by private investors. NASA is expected to undertake long-term projects with little hope of budget stability. With regard to human spaceflight, it is the committee's view that NASA can and should be the source of resource and technology maturation, system requirements, systems architecture, procurement oversight, exploration operations, expensive multiple-user facilities. NASA generally should not be its own supplier. Numerous studies have shown that any organization, public or private, that is its own supplier lacks much of the incentive to deliver the most cost-efficient product. Today, NASA has many options available to procure systems innovatively. These include, but are not limited to, commercial purchases, Space Act agreements, COTS-like cost-sharing agreements, prizes for innovative technologies, and others. Determining the requirements for an engineering project while it is being built inevitably leads to a very expensive result. Requirements should be clearly established prior to beginning engineering development. Work that contains significant risk or for which scope cannot be accurately defined is generally best performed under cost reimbursable contracts. Work with scope that can be accurately defined should generally be conducted under fixed price contracts. The committee is convinced that NASA can substantially increase the opportunities for entrepreneurial, commercial involvement in its space programs by more aggressively utilizing the commercial authorities already granted to the agency, and by adopting benchmarks in commercial practices utilized in other federal agencies. 9.6. Managing the balance of human and robotic spaceflight. Although the committee was tasked only to address the human spaceflight program, including robotic missions that are specifically encompassed within that program, it is appropriate to comment about the role and synergy of human and robotic exploration as a whole. The committee believes that America is best served by a complementary and balanced space program involving both a robotic component and a human component. The robotic portion is often but not exclusively associated with science missions. Without a strong and sustainable science program, the means of acquiring fundamental new knowledge, any space program would be hollow. The same can be said of the absence of a human spaceflight program. Humans in space on new and exciting missions inspire the public, but so do the spectacular accomplishments of such robotic spacecraft as the Hubble Space Telescope, the Mars rovers, the Earth Observing System satellites, or the twin Voyager spacecraft that are poised to reach interstellar space. This is to suggest that both the human spaceflight program and the science program are key parts of a nation's space portfolio. Needless to say, robotic spaceflight should play an important role in the human spaceflight program itself, reconnoitering scientifically important destinations, surveying future landing sites, providing logistical support, and more. Correspondingly, humans can play an important role in science missions, particularly in field geology, exploration, and in the maintenance and enhancement of robotic systems in space. It is in the interest of both science and human spaceflight that a credible and well-rationalized strategy of coordination between the two types of pursuit be developed, without forcing unwarranted intermingling in areas where each would better proceed on its own. Robotic activity in space is generally much less costly than human activity, and therefore offers a major inherent advantage. Of even greater importance, it does not place human lives at risk. Astronauts provide the greatest advantage in the most complex or novel environments or circumstances. This will be the case in the exploration of planetary surfaces and in repair or servicing missions of the type undertaken for the Hubble Space Telescope's primary mirror. In contrast, the value of humans in space is usually at its minimum when they are employed transporting cargo. The bottom line is that there are important roles to be played by both humans and robots in space, and America should strive to maintain a balanced program incorporating the best of both kinds of explorers. That said, there are nonetheless inevitable conflicts that arise from the competition among programs for resources, particularly financial resources. It is therefore of the utmost importance, if balance is to be maintained, that neither the human program nor the robotic spaceflight program be permitted to cannibalize the other. This has been a significant concern in the past, particularly given the size of the human spaceflight program. Difficulties in the human space program too often swallowed resources that had been planned for the robotic program, as well as for aeronautics and space technology. Robotics are generally, although not exclusively, considered to be of greater interest to the scientific community. It is essential that budgetary firewalls be built between these two broad categories of activity. In the case of the International Space Station, one firewall should be the establishment of an organizational entity to select endeavors to be pursued aboard the space station. Without such a mechanism, turmoil is assured and program balance endangered. Findings: the right mission and the right size. NASA's budget should match its mission and goals. Further, NASA should be given the ability to shape its organization and infrastructure accordingly, while maintaining facilities deemed to be of national importance. Robotic program coordination. The robotic and human explorations of space should be synergistic, both at the program level, e.g., science probes to Mars and humans to Mars, and at the operational level, e.g., humans with robotic assistance on a spacewalk. Without burdening the space science budget or influencing its process of peer-based selection of science missions, NASA should proceed to develop the robotic component of its human exploration program. Management authority. The NASA administrator and program managers need to be given the responsibility and authority to manage their endeavors. This includes providing flexibility to tailor resources, including people, facilities, and funds, to fit mission needs. Stability in programs. In the most recent decade, NASA has spent about 80% of the GDP deflated budget that it had in the decade of Apollo. Recurring budget ambiguities and reductions and redirections of policy, coupled with the high fixed cost structure of NASA, have not optimized the return on that investment. Right job for the NASA workforce. NASA has a talented but aging workforce. NASA should focus on the challenging long-term tasks of technology development, cutting-edge new concepts, system architecture development, requirements definition, and oversight of the development and operation of systems. Fixed operating costs at NASA. There are significant fixed costs in the NASA system. Given that reality, reducing the funding profile much below the optimum for the development of a given program has an amplified effect of delaying benefits and increasing total program cost. NASA's fundamental budgetary conundrum. Within the current structure of the budget, NASA essentially has the resources either to build a major new system or to operate one, but not to do both. This is the root cause of the gap in capability of launching crew to low Earth orbit under the current budget. It will likely be the source of other gaps in the future. Commercial involvement in exploration. NASA has considerable flexibility in its acquisition activities due to special provisions of the Space Act. NASA should exploit these provisions whenever appropriate, and in general encourage more engagement by commercial providers, allocating to them tasks and responsibilities that are consistent with their strengths. 9.7. Concluding summary. NASA is the most accomplished space organization in the world. Its human spaceflight activities are nonetheless at a tipping point, primarily due to a mismatch of goals and resources. Either additional funds need to be made available, or a far more modest program involving little or no exploration needs to be adopted. Various options can be identified that offer exciting and worthwhile opportunities for the human exploration of space if appropriate funds can be made available. Such funds can be considerably leveraged by having NASA attack its overhead costs and change some of its traditional ways of conducting its affairs, and by giving its management the authority to bring about such changes. The American public can take pride in NASA's past accomplishments. The opportunity now exists to provide for the future human spaceflight program worthy of a great nation. End of section 19. End of Seeking a Human Spaceflight Program Worthy of a Great Nation by the Review of U.S. Human Spaceflight Plans Committee.
Thanks for watching. Please subscribe and click on the bell to turn on notifications.